The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty schoolyard, the muffled sound of distant laughter and footsteps fading as students hurried home. Behind the overgrown hedges at the far end of the field, hidden from view, Rita and Emmanuel crouched low, their breath quick and hearts racing, not from fear of being caught, but from the intensity of what they were doing. "Emmanuel, someone might see us," Rita whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Her trembling hands clung to her brother's shirt, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of guilt and longing. "Nobody comes here at this time," Emmanuel replied, his voice steady but his eyes betraying an inner turmoil he refused to acknowledge. The boundary they had crossed so many times before now felt invisible, erased by years of secrecy and the misplaced comfort they found in each other. But the shadows weren't as deserted as they thought. A single figure froze behind the back wall, their phone slipping from their hand in disbelief. Adele, their closest friend, had been heading home when a flicker of movement caught his eyes. What he saw now rooted him to the spot. His mind reeled as he tried to process what was happening. The image of his two best friends' siblings locked in an embrace that no brother and sister should ever share. Adele's gasp was audible enough to snap Rita and Emmanuel out of their trance. They scrambled apart, their faces pale with shock as they turned to see him standing there, his wide eyes a mix of betrayal, confusion, and disgust. What are you doing?" Adele stammered, his voice cracking. His heart raced, not just from what he had witnessed, but from the weight of what it meant. These were his friends, the people he thought he knew best. Yet, the truth he had stumbled upon shattered everything. Rita's lips quivered as she tried to form words, but nothing came. Emmanuel stepped forward, his shoulders squared, but even he couldn't meet Adele's gaze. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "It's not what it looks like." Adele shook his head, his voice rising. "Not what it looks like? You are siblings, Emmanuel. This is wrong. What is going on with you two?" The weight of Adele's words hung in the air, each syllable a hammer blow to the fragile world Rita and Emmanuel had built in secret. For the first time, the enormity of their actions seemed to crash down on them, magnified by the horror in their friend's eyes. "I trusted you," Adele said, his voice breaking. "I looked up to you. Emmanuel, you are 16. You should know better. I mean, Rita, you're just 13. You are a kid. What are you even doing?" Rita's tears spilled over as she buried her face in her hands. Emmanuel reached out to comfort her but stopped, realizing how it would look. Instead, he turned back to Adele, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is not as simple as you think." "No," Adele snapped, his anger rising. "It's not simple, it's sick. Do you even realize what you're doing to yourselves? To your family? What if someone else had seen you?" Adele's words cut deep, leaving an uncomfortable silence in their wake. Rita sobbed quietly, her face streaked with tears. Emmanuel stood frozen, his fist clenched, as the full weight of his friend's condemnation bore down on him. Adele took a step closer, his voice softening but still firm. "You need help, both of you. This isn't love. It's something else, something broken. But it's not too late to fix it. You have to stop before it destroys you." Adele sat on the edge of a concrete bench in the school deserted courtyard, his face buried in his hands. Rita and Emmanuel stood a few feet away, their tension palpable as they exchanged hesitant glances. Silence stretched painfully, broken only by the occasional chirp of birds in the distance. Finally, Emmanuel took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Adele, please, just hear us out," he said, his voice low but desperate. Adele looked up, his eyes red with disbelief and anger. Hear you out? I just saw something that can't be unseen, Emmanuel. How do you even explain this? How do you justify it? Rita whimpered softly, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though shielding against the judgments that hung heavy in the air. It is not what you think, she whispered. Then what is it, Rita? Adele snapped, his frustration boiling over, because from where I stood, it looked exactly like what it shouldn't be. Emmanuel sighed, dragging a hand down his face. We didn't plan for this to happen. It's not like we woke up one day and decided this. It just happened. It just happened. You are siblings. Adele's voice cracked with exasperation. Do you even hear yourself right now? This is wrong on every level. And what about your parents? Do they know? No. Rita's voice came out sharp, her eyes wide with fear. They can't know, please, Adele, you can't tell them. Adele stared at her in disbelief. Rita, how can I not tell them? They are your parents. They deserve to know what's going on under their own roof. They won't understand, Emmanuel said, his tone pleading. You don't know how we grew up. You don't know what it's like being us. And help me understand, Adele shot back, because right now, none of this makes sense. Rita hesitated, then slowly sat down on the ground, her head bowed. It started when we were little, she murmured, her voice barely audible. We didn't know what it meant back then. We didn't even know it was wrong. Adele's eyes narrowed, his curiosity piqued, despite his anger. What do you mean? What happened? The memory was vivid, etched into Rita's mind like a painting she couldn't erase. Their parents, Victor and Glory, were devout, strict, and deeply religious. They had raised Rita and Emmanuel in a sheltered world, one where sin was an abstract concept discussed only in whispers and where conversations about the body or desires were considered taboo. While other children learned about puberty and relationships in health classes or from their parents, Rita and Emmanuel were shielded from such knowledge under the guise of preserving their innocence. He never told us anything, Emmanuel began, his voice heavy with bitterness. Not about our bodies, not about boundaries, not about love. All they ever said was, don't talk to strangers and stay pure. Rita nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. We were so naive. We didn't know anything and was really ashamed to ask questions in class. So, when we started noticing changes, we only had each other to figure it out. Adele frowned. Changes. Puberty, Emmanuel said bluntly. We didn't understand what was happening to us. And when we started feeling things, we thought it was normal. We thought it was just how people stayed close. Rita's cheeks flushed as she spoke. We didn't have anyone to talk to, Adele. Our parents avoided anything that even hinted at the topic. They said it was sinful to dwell on such things. So we experimented. Adele's jaw tightened as he listened. The pieces were falling into place, but they painted a picture far darker than he had anticipated. Experimented how? Emmanuel hesitated before answering. At first, it was small things, holding hands, hugging too long, but then it escalated. By the time we realized it wasn't normal, it was too late. We were too deep. Adele shook his head, struggling to process their confession. You are saying this all started because your parents didn't teach you about boundaries, about relationships? They taught us to fear sin, Rita said bitterly. But they never taught us what it looked like. They kept us in the dark, and in that darkness, we stumbled into something we didn't understand. Adele stood frozen, staring at the siblings who had just bared the darkest corners of their hearts. His chest tightened as their confession echoed in his mind, each word heavier than the last. He had expected secrets. Everyone had them, but nothing like this. You! Adele's voice broke as he finally spoke, stepping back instinctively. You both, you are serious? Adele's mind was a wild ring. Flashes of the past few months played before his eyes, moments he had once dismissed as innocent, but now felt like pieces of a puzzle he wished he hadn't solved. He remembered how Rita had always been unusually close to Emmanuel, how they would disappear together during breaks or linger at the back of the schoolyard long after the bell rang, hissing as he tried to process the storm of emotions coursing through him. But I shared those videos with you. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. Adele had always been the cool friend, the one who introduced others to things their strict household forbade. When he first showed Emmanuel and Rita some explicit videos on his phone, he thought he was doing them a favor, educating them in ways their overly religious parents never would. He had laughed at their wide-eyed reactions, teasing them about how sheltered they were. But now, those memories twisted in his mind like a knife. Adele, it's not your fault, Emmanuel said quietly, sensing his turmoil. We were already confused before then. But when you showed us those things, it made everything worse. It gave us ideas we didn't know how to handle. Rita nodded, her voice trembling. We didn't even understand half of what we saw, but it made us curious, made us want to try things. Adele stopped pacing, staring at them with a mix of guilt and horror. So, what? You're saying I made this happen? No, Rita cried. It didn't make this happen. But it didn't help. Adele's hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. The weight of their words crushed him, and he couldn't escape the gnawing sense of responsibility. He had thought he was being harmless, maybe even helpful, by exposing them to things their parents hid from them. But now he saw how his actions had fanned the flames of their already fragile understanding of themselves and the world around them. I don't know what to do, Adele admitted, his voice barely a whisper. This is too much. You've got to tell someone, your parents, a counselor, anyone. No, Emmanuel's voice was sharp with panic. You can't tell anyone, Adele. If they find out, they will hate us. They will disown us. Adele shook his head. You don't understand. This isn't just about your family. This could destroy both of you. What if someone finds out at school? What if this gets out? Adele clenched his fist, torn between his anger, guilt, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility to help his friends. He didn't want to abandon them, but he also couldn't ignore what they had done, or his role in it. I need time to think, he finally said, his voice strained. But you too, you need help. This can't keep going on. As Adele walked away, leaving the siblings sitting in the shadow of their confession, his mind raced. The weight of their secret and the part he had unknowingly played in it pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He had always thought he was in control, the one who understood everything about the world. But now he felt like he was drowning in the consequences of his own ignorance. Adele's departure left Rita and Emmanuel sitting in the stillness of the backyard, their breath uneven and their minds racing with fear. They stared at the ground, unable to meet each other's gaze. What if he tells Rita his part, a voice trembling? The thought of their parents finding out, or worse, the school was unbearable. Emmanuel shook his head, though his own voice was unsteady. He won't. Adele wouldn't do that to us. And what if he does? Rita's eyes brimmed with tears. What if he hates us now? What if— Stop! Emmanuel interrupted, moving closer to her. We'll figure it out. We always do. His arms encircled her, pulling her into a hug meant to comfort. Rita hesitated for a moment, then clung to him as though her life depended on it. The heat of the day, the intensity of their emotions, and the sheer desperation of their situation pressed down on them like a suffocating weight. "I am scared, Emmanuel," Rita admitted, a voice muffled against his chest. "Me too," he confessed, "but no one understands us like we do. No one ever has." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. They had been each other's solace for as long as they could remember, a bond that had grown deeper and more complicated over time. What had once been innocent hugs and shared secrets had morphed into something they couldn't explain, something they knew was wrong but couldn't seem to stop. Rita looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with anguish. "Why does it feel like this, Emmanuel? Why can't we stop?" Emmanuel didn't have an answer. All he knew was that the sight of her tears towards him, that the fear in her eyes made him want to protect her at all costs. He wiped a tear from her cheek, his hand lingering for just a moment too long. "It's us against the wall, Rita," he said softly. "It's always been that way." The words were meant to reassure, but instead, they ignited something neither of them could control. The weight of their shared fear, the obsession, and the overwhelming intensity of their emotions welled over in an instant. Before they knew it, comforting embrace turned into something else, something they had promised themselves they wouldn't do again. But the promises they made to themselves always broke in the face of what they felt. It was as though the more forbidden it was, the more impossible it became to resist. They were spiraling, and they knew it, yet they clung to each other as though the world would fall apart without their connection. When it was over, they sat in silence, the reality of what had just happened settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Rita crawled into herself, her knees pulled to her chest, while Emmanuel stared at the ground, his hands clenched into his fists. "This has to stop," Rita whispered, her voice barely audible. Emmanuel didn't respond. He knew she was right, but he also knew they were trapped by their emotions, their circumstances, and the secrets they bound themselves together. Neither of them realized that Adele, having turned back to comfort them one last time, had seen it all. The shadow loomed behind the corner of the school building, his heart sinking as he watched his friends destroy themselves in a way he could no longer ignore. Adele sat at the dining table, absently pushing the food around his plate. His mother, Sarah, noticed his unusual quietness. Normally, Adele was the most animated at the dinner table, always sharing something witty or insightful. Tonight, however, his demeanor was distant. His eyes avoided hers, and his shoulders dropped with a weight she couldn't ignore. "Adele," Sarah called softly, setting down her fork. He didn't respond. "Adele," she said again, firmer this time, her voice carrying the gentle authority he had always respected. He glanced up, startled. "Yes, Mom." "What's going on with you? You have been quiet since you got back from school." "Nothing, I'm fine," he replied too quickly, his voice thin and unconvincing. Sarah tilted her head, a psychologist's intuition instantly catching the defensive note in his tone. She reached out and placed her hands over his, her gaze soft but probing. "Adele, you know I can tell when something is bothering you. You don't have to carry it alone. Talk to me." Adele hesitated, his throat tightening. He trusted his mother more than anyone, but the weight of what he had witnessed felt too heavy, too complicated to share. Yet the look in her eyes, warm and unrelenting, broke down his walls. "Mom, is there something you would understand?" he muttered, his voice shaking. "Try me," she said calmly. He pulled his hand away, standing abruptly from the table and pacing the room. Sarah watched him carefully, her heart tightening as she noticed the turmoil etched in his face. "It's about Rita and Emmanuel," he finally said, his voice barely audible. Sarah frowned. "What about them?" "They are," Adele faltered, his voice catching. He turned to face her, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. Mom, they are doing things they shouldn't be doing. They are siblings. Sarah froze. For a moment, it felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. She stared at Adele, trying to process what she had just heard. What do you mean, Adele? Adele's voice cracked as he continued. I saw them, Mom. I caught them at the back of the school, kissing. And it wasn't the kind of kiss that's innocent. He told me everything. How they love each other. How they can't stop. Mom, it's so messed up. They even begged me not to tell anyone. Sarah's hand flew to her chest, her mind reeling. She blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself as a wave of shock and disbelief washed over her. Oh my God, she whispered. Adele's voice grew frantic. I didn't know what to do, Mom. I tried to tell them it was wrong, but they are so attached. They have been like this for years, and it's like no one ever noticed. I don't know how to help them. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain composure. As a psychologist, she had dealt with complex, even disturbing cases before, but hearing this from her own son, about people she knew, struck her in a way nothing else ever had. Adele, she said softly, standing and moving forward to him. Thank you for telling me. I know that it wasn't easy. I feel so guilty, he blurted out, his voice breaking. I shared those videos and materials with them. I thought I was educating them, but I didn't know. Stop, Sarah interrupted, placing her hands on his shoulders. This isn't your fault. You didn't create the situation, Adele. You were trying to help, and you didn't know the context. Please, don't carry this blame. Adele dropped his gaze, his tears rolling down his cheeks. What do we do, Mom? How do we help them? Sarah hesitated, her mind racing with the gravity of the situation. First, she began cautiously. You need to understand how it started. This kind of relationship doesn't happen in a vacuum. Something in their environment, in their upbringing, allowed it to take root. She sat him down on the couch, holding his hand tightly, as if to reassure him. Adele, this is very serious. We need to be careful, but their parents have to know. They can't fix this if they don't even know it's happening. But what if it ruins everything? Adele asked, his voice small. Sarah sighed deeply, brushing his hair back with maternal tenderness. It might be painful, but the longer this goes, the more damage it will cause for Rita, Emmanuel, and everyone involved. Sometimes doing the right thing means facing uncomfortable truths. Adele nodded reluctantly, his heart still heavy, but trusting his mother's wisdom. Sarah leaned back, her mind already strategizing. She knew this was far beyond a simple family issue. It was a deeply rooted problem that required both sensitivity and professional intervention. But as she thought of Rita and Emmanuel, two young souls trapped in a cycle they couldn't escape, her heart ached with compassion. This would be one of the hardest conversations she has ever had, but she was determined to help them find a way back to themselves. Sarah sat in her car outside Victor and Glory's home, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. What had begun as a normal day had turned into a nightmare she couldn't ignore. She knew she had to talk to them, but how could she even begin to approach such a delicate and deeply troubling issue? After a few moments, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. Her role as a psychologist meant she had dealt with challenging cases before, but nothing had prepared her for this. With a quiet resolve, she exited the car and walked up to the front door, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. When she rang the doorbell, she tried to mask the worry in her face, but the truth was, she wasn't sure how the conversation would unfold. Victor and Glory opened the door together, both of them smiling warmly at her. Hera, good to see you, Victor greeted, his voice hearty and welcoming. Hello, Victor. Glory, she replied, her voice calm, but weighed down with the heaviness of what she was about to discuss. "He is coming," Rory said, gesturing for Sarah to enter. "Dinner is almost ready. You must stay with us." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She stepped inside, her thoughts spinning. She followed them into the cozy living room, where they all sat down. The atmosphere was warm, a stark contrast to the storm inside her head. "I need to talk to you both about something important," Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. Victor and Chloe exchanged a quick glance, both of them sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's going on?" Victor asked, his smile fading. Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. "It's about Rita and Emmanuel." At the mention of their children, both Victor and Chloe stiffened. Sarah could see the pride in their eyes as they always spoke highly of their kids, but she also saw the flicker of concern that had already begun to settle in. "There's something I've discovered, something I feel you both need to know," Sarah continued, her voice compassionate but direct. "It's difficult, but I'm sure you'll be shocked. But it's crucial for their well-being." "What is it, Sarah?" "You are scaring us," Chloe said, her tone dazed with anxiety. Sarah looked them both in the eyes, choosing her words carefully. Rita and Emmanuel are in a situation that goes beyond the ordinary sibling bond. They have been engaging in an inappropriate and unhealthy relationship. Both hit like a punch to the gut. Louis' hands flew to her mouth, and Victor's face paled, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Victor stammered. "That can't be possible, my kids having sex with each other." "Yes, they have been having sex with each other," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "I know it's hard to hear, but this has been happening for some time. It's a complex and dangerous situation." Louis stood up, pacing the room in shock. No, this can't be true. My children would never." She trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. "I know this is difficult to process," Sarah said, her voice softening. "But as a psychologist, I've seen this kind of patterns before. It's often a result of isolation, lack of proper boundaries, and sometimes even unaddressed trauma. This isn't about blame, but about understanding the root causes and addressing them before it's too late." Victor's voice broke through his shock. "What do we do? What can we do?" Sarah stood up, walking over to him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "The first step is to create an open, safe space for both of them to talk. This isn't something that can be fixed with anger or punishment. It requires careful, guided intervention. They need professional help, and so do you. This isn't a reflection of their morality, but a sign that something has gone wrong in their emotional development. As parents, you need to address it now, with empathy and understanding." Chloe looked at her husband, her face pale with fear. "But how do we fix this? How do we make sure they understand how wrong this is?" Sarah sighed softly. "The road ahead won't be easy. They need therapy, individual and family. But most importantly, they need to be given the chance to heal without shame. It's important to make them realize the consequences of their actions, but in a way that doesn't deepen their confusion or guilt. They need guidance, love, and firm boundaries. The relationship with them has to be rebuilt based on trust, openness, and clear limits." Victor nodded slowly, trying to absorb the gravity of what she was saying. "We never saw it coming. We have tried our best to raise them right." "I know you have," Sarah said gently. "But sometimes, things we don't see, what goes unsaid, can have the most impact. The key now is not to let the shame and guilt close the door on the conversation. Open it, help them understand the severity, but also show them the paths to healing." The silence in the room was suffocating. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to feel the weight of the moment. She knew how hard this was going to be for Victor and Rory, for all of them, but she also knew that facing the truth was the first step towards healing. I'll help you through this, Sarah continued, her voice resolute. But you need to act fast. You have to be willing to face the hard truths, no matter how painful they are. Glory wiped her tears and looked at her husband, a face full of determination. We'll do whatever it takes. You can't let them keep spiraling down this path. Sarah nodded, relieved that they were open to seeking help. It was going to be a long road, but at least now they had a direction. It wasn't a solution, but it was the beginning. I'll help you find a therapist. Together, we'll make sure they get the help they need, Sarah said, a voice full of quiet strength. As the evening stretched on, Victor and Louis absorbed Sarah's words, their faces etched with grief and regret, but also a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be long, and the walk would be hard, but for the sake of their children and their family, they knew they had no other choice but to face it head-on. They would do whatever it took to heal the damage that had been done one step at a time.